The crowned Mary standing with a golden halo, the Archangel Michael who is weighing the good and the bad deeds of a soul, the youth who is depicted as a holy knight with heart and sword. All these figures are embroidered brilliantly, and the naive, detailed narrative calls to mind folk embroidery. In the representation of this theme, the artist used an allegorical formula. As a childish-looking angel unsuccessfully tries to pour the water from the sea into a small pit, so St. Augustine's insight into the transcendental mystery of the Trinity is insufficient because of his human nature. Very interesting is the artist's absorption with problems of linear perspective. He even attempted to calculate the sea, which is getting narrow in the distance.
The term Renaissance appeared in the 15th century. to signify the rebirth of classical erudition. In the mid-15th century, it had already established an application for renovated representative arts. Later, the classification of Renaissance art was elaborated, and this early period was called Quattrocento, or the early Renaissance. In the 15th century, too, Florence was ahead of other artistic centers. New great artists appeared here, such as Masaccio in painting, Donatello in sculpture, and Brunelleschi in architecture. All of them can be considered the fathers of the Renaissance, and Florence itself as the New Athens. The rendering of three-dimensional space by means of linear perspective, which was based on the laws of optics and mathematics, became the most important discovery of the masters of the Renaissance. Fra Filippo Lippi used the linear perspective scheme in a small part of his altarpiece, the so-called predella, with the Vision of St. Augustine. It is notable that he even attempted to calculate the sea, which is getting narrow in the distance. He investigated the allegorical meaning of the vision with great visual insistence. The Trinity was represented in the form of a disk with three faces. St. Augustine's attempt to obtain an insight into the transcendental mystery of the Trinity is unsuccessful in exactly the same way as an angel tries to pour water from the sea into a small pit.
It seems that we have just attracted the attention of the child. He seemingly looks at us sidelong, and the lips of Mary have just taken on a tender smile. So imperceptible are the light shadows in the corners of her mouth. Leonardo displayed how to build, by means of chiaroscuro, not only the volumes, but also the slightest emotions, as if they were woven of the tonal shades. According to Greek mythology, King Acreus was foretold that he would die at the hand of his own grandson, so his daughter Danae was imprisoned in a tower. But Zeus fell in love with her and took on the appearance of a golden shower of rain. The artist also accentuated in this painting a popular motif of that period. The theme of people's ages is represented by an old servant whose age contrasts with the youth of Danae, reminding us of the transience of time.
In the second half of the 18th century, there appeared a new artistic trend in Rome, that of neoclassicism. It reflected a new wave of interest in ancient culture, which spread through many European countries. Roman neoclassicism took superficial artistic formulas from the ancients, and the classic purity of form was tinted now by sentimentality, now by the erotic connotations of the surviving Rococo style. The most famous sculptor of the late 18th, early 19th century, Antonio Canova, lived and worked in Rome. He acted as dictator of artistic tastes, and his imagery soon was praised as a model of beauty. He was invited to France by Napoleon, and to Russia by Catherine II and Alexander I. Canova refused the trip to Russia, but the Russian ambassador, Count Yusupov, returned to St. Petersburg with his statuary Amour and Psyche, which was the author's variant of the statue in the Louvre. According to legend, the goddess Venus took a dislike to Psyche because of her beauty, and arranged an eternal sleep for her. Amor returned her to life with a kiss. Canova sought to achieve the classical harmony of proportions and fluid outlines, but these formulas often took on a gracious and coddled form in his work.
The artists considered St. Luke, one of the Gospel writers, as their direct patron For, according to the medieval legend, he created the first pictorial image of Mary as he saw her in his vision. The history of this picture, several versions of which are known in museums of Boston, Munich, and Bruges, is quite unusual. It was brought to Spain, where it was divided into two parts, which later found themselves with different owners. It was good luck that each part was bought for the Hermitage at different times to be reunited in this collection.
The painters considered St. Luke, one of the Gospel writers, as their direct patron, for according to the medieval legend, he created the first pictorial image of Mary as he saw her in his vision. It was often the case that some painter made a self-portrait when representing the image of St. Luke. It was also supposed that in the Hermitage painting, St. Luke portrays the Virgin by the Dutch painter Rogier van der Weyden, we can see the Master himself. The viewer's eye and the painter's art are concentrated on precisely observed details, such as the charming, childish movements of the limbs of the child and the specific gesture of holding the silver point with the thumb and forefinger and dropping a perpendicular on the drawing surface. The space is devoted to the placid and calm interior and the equally harmonious distant view to which our gaze is drawn by two figures, male and female, standing near the parapet with their backs to us. It cannot be excluded that the painter represented a real townscape, either that of Tournai, where he studied in 1427-1432 in the workshop of Robert Campin, or a view of Brussels, where he later became the city painter.
During his stay in Italy, the artist became acquainted with some ideas of Stoicism, which found an evident reflection in this painting. Clear, if not rigid drawing distinguished the early work of Rubens. The clear reality of the features in the treatment of this image was brought together with such artistic formula as majestic rhythm and expressive monumentalism of composition. Van Dyck had the ability to retain, in the final painting, the freshness and spontaneity of the initial sketch from nature. We can perceive the master's artistic temperament and a reasoned refinement in his brushwork, as well as in the subtle treatment of features, details, and the surface itself. Its complicated knot of tense and passionate spirituality, strong will, and cold self-restraint. This daring look, tousled hair, and strange proletarian hat pulled over his eyes could signify a challenge to the world. During this joyful feast, which took place on the 6th of January, there was always a pie with one bean hidden inside. The man who won a bean with a piece of pie was declared the king, and he there chose a queen and a retinue who obeyed him implicitly. The painting represents the feast with the humor, freedom, and joy of living characteristic of Flemish feasts. We see a man who reached his aim, poor, emaciated, tired, but endowed finally with a warm and blessed light of love and absolution. Suddenly, the infinite inner perspective sweeps open in our mind because we comprehend that we are not external and accidental witnesses of this perfectly natural family scene, but direct participants in it, for it is mankind prostrating itself before God the Father. The Madonna by Cranach looks like a princess with golden hair, as if she were taken from old German legends. Cranach set down time and time again the ideal type of female beauty of the period: the bulging forehead, narrow and wide-spaced eyes, oval face with sharp chin, and long curly hair.
Cranach's ideal of the perfect woman was inspired by a real person, Katharina von Bora, Martin Luther's wife. This is suggested by the clear likeness between her appearance and that of Mary in Cranach's painting The Virgin and Child Under an Apple Tree. It is one of the most poetic images in the art of the German Renaissance. Cranach's Madonna recalls a blonde-haired princess from an old German fairy tale. Little Christ holds bread and an apple in his hands, and these objects are here to symbolize the act of the fall and that of redemption, thanks to Christ's sacrificial death. Only these sacred symbols are reminiscent of the theme of the Passion. The dominant mood of the painting is determined by Mary's tender gesture with which she supports the child, and her thoughtful facial expression. Her long and curly reddish hair softly runs down the shoulders, while the sumptuous twigs of the apple tree frame her head as a kind of crown. In the distance, we can see a beautiful fairy tale landscape.
The ancient goddess is represented as soaring above the earth, standing on a ball, and holding an allegorical brimming bowl with gifts intended for courageous men who venture to go ahead. Simultaneously, in the other hand, she holds a sword and a bridle for those overcome by the sin of arrogance. This small portable altar came out of the workshop of the famous enamel master of Limoges, who was endowed with a particular sense of color and decorative smartness. The scenes of the Passion of Christ are imbued here with acute medieval spirituality, strengthened by subtle intensity of color. All landscape details by Poussin are subdued to a well-balanced compositional order supported by a powerful, magnificent rhythm. Mountains, heavens, rivers, as well as hills and dells, inhabited by figures of light-hearted nymphs and peaceful ploughmen, are imbued with a perennial beauty and harmony that conforms to the laws of nature and the universe. Watteau was endowed with a subtle and delicate psychological insight that allowed him to represent depth of character and the hidden relations between the subjects of his paintings. Here are offered the contradictory feelings of a charming beauty, who was already called by Watteau's contemporaries La Capricieuse. Not only the painter's own impressions of his journey over Morocco, but also his passionate interest in Rubens determined the fascinating romanticism of this picture. The lion hunt of Rubens inspired him with the forceful drama of the motif itself and with its spontaneous, rapid brushwork. In Monet's early picture, The Lady in the Garden of 1867, the white dress is painted with blue, for in the shadows there always appears the complementary color of the light, as here an orange-yellow umbrella requires a turquoise-blue dress.
The experience of the Barbizon school opened not only the new, actual motifs for landscape painting, but contributed to the evolving of a new pictorial technique by loose brushing. Plein air painting was a starting point of this trend, and soon the moment came in the history of French art when the young artist Claude Monet is said to have repeated, following the Barbizon artists, "I paint what I see," but to have added, "and I paint so how I see." This was the starting point of Impressionism. Monet had no permanent studio, for the sky above and the ground beneath became his actual studio. The Lady in the Garden is his earlier painting of 1867. We can see the moving flowers charged with bright light and the long, mobile shadows. The white dress is painted with blue in the shadows, for it was here the true hue created by the shadow from the orange-yellow umbrella. In the autumn of 1876, Monet lived in the country house of his friend and patron, Dr. Rochide, at Montgeron. From the early morning, one could see him there near the pond and the blooming brushwood, working at one of his huge canvases. He painted quickly in order not to omit all details of the changing lighting. Monet did not draw in the academic sense of this word. Drawing was not the object of his artistic conscience. Monet achieved a scintillating, fresh range of tones when applying them pure in minute touches to the white ground of the canvas. Such canvas seen at a short distance seemed to be a plain surface covered with innumerable and irregular colored patches, but at some distance from the canvas they miraculously turned into mobile image throbbing with life and excitement, with swinging flowers, fleeting ripples, quivering verdure. To represent at one stroke the changing pulsation of life, and to get the immediate connection between the painter's eye perceiving nature's color and the canvas surface bearing his pigment's equivalent, without turning either to any conception of content or to literary subject. It was the new method of working at the painting, as well as the art, which had to render the mentality of the mid-19th century. It was the discovery of Claude Monet, but it was also the outcome of the life of a whole group of men. Alfred Sisley painted his picture in the Hermitage collection, The Town Villeneuve-la-Garenne, in 1872. It displays the living and immense space, imbued with light and air. But the impressionist brushwork of the artist created the volumes with solid forms of the tree trunks and houses of the provincial French town.
This work is one in a series of portraits of Jeanne Saint-Marie by Renoir. He handled her image in different ways, but always as if she was woven of a spectre of tinted light. In the Hermitage full-length portrait, we see the actress in gala costume, as if she is ready to go out dressed in compliance with the latest fashion of the time. On the canvas, one can read the usual Tahitian greeting written by the painter himself. It means only, "Where do you go?" But the painter obviously turned this simple local greeting into a general question of deep philosophical meaning. Here is represented a woman bearing a fruit, as if she was the Tahitian Eve of this earthly paradise. Vincent van Gogh entitled this picture, "Memory of the Garden at Etten," to recall his native house in Holland. In the surroundings of southern nature, we can see the women's figures, one of which is that of a Dutch peasant woman. Everywhere, in northern and in southern lands, only women's hands make the earth fertile and flowering, the painter seems to say. The motif chosen here by Picasso was rather trivial, a meeting of two sisters, one of whom became a prostitute and the other a nun. But the gloomy and rigid vaults above their heads seem to be of the same material their bodies are made of. The arch created by both closing figures is solid enough to withstand the vaults hanging over them, as if they embodied the difficulties of human destiny and life. The red hue, which stands so sharply against the intense green and blue tones of the background, signifies in the imaginative world of Matisse the innate power of man, creating music on the eternal green earth under the equally eternal blue sky. Man borrows his energy from nature, says the picture of Matisse, for he embodies it in art. There is another work on this theme in the Hermitage collection, the big picture, Dance.
When seeing the figurine of the Italian Renaissance sculptor in one of the rooms of the Autumn Salon of 1905, the critic Louis Vaucel explained, "Donatello among the Fauves," because the paintings of young artists which were hung in this room were all painted with violently bright colors, absolutely free from any standards. From that moment, those artists were called the Fauves, or wild beasts. Experimenting with pigments and following thus the traditional formal bent of the French art, the Fauve made important discoveries in the sphere of color, which was one of the starting points of modern painting. The Fauve, as an artistic trend, the first one in the history of modern art, had a short life, but it gave an impetus for such great artists of the 20th century as Henri Matisse, as well as for other important artists, Derain, Vlamingh, Marquet, Van Dongen. In Vlaminck's work View of the Seine, an ordinary landscape motif was transformed into a really severe image, imbued with dramatic force and passion. The bohemian atmosphere of the artistic Montmartre determined forever the extremely bold and spectacular brushing characteristic of Kees van Dongen. In his painting, Lady in the Black Hat, we see the image of the free and proud, dangerous if not fatal woman. Pictorial space of the huge canvas seems to be tensed, so actively the green pushes the blue to the upper border. Against the green, the red-pink bodies are represented as if they are set against the blue. Elastic as tensed springs, they are charged with force and fire, strengthened by the green background. The main objects of this painting are the colors themselves. The painting Music by Henri Matisse was a strikingly simple and at the same time magnificent and visually convincing expression of the idea revealing the act of artistic endeavor. It was also a great wall decoration, and it marked the beginning of a period of monumental painting, which was restored to life by Matisse, who used the means of modern art. Matisse painted the picture Music for a renowned collector from Moscow. Sergei Ivanovich Shukin initiated a number of motifs in the work of Matisse. Once he proposed to portray the artist's family with Madame Matisse and their 3 children. So the family portrait appeared, and the commissioner, endowed with rare taste, appraised it very highly. In this work, the portrayed reality was subordinated to an elegant artistic arrangement of form and joyful color patterns, penetrated with a purely musical rhythm and inner spirituality so characteristic of Matisse's work.
Gainsborough sought to achieve the greatest possible degree of spontaneity. His special insight into the psychology of women makes him essentially a woman's painter. The exquisite harmony of his favorite kohl tones, blue and dark blue, silver gray, were used to emphasize poetic beauty and refined inner life. The subject and the background merge into a single entity. The immediacy and spontaneity which are present in nature are present also in Gainsborough's work. Through a special winding up of the mechanisms, all the figures began to move: an owl, a peacock, a cock, the turning face and the mushroom's cap. The Roman figures indicate the hours, the ciphers indicate the minutes. In the 18th century in Russia, only the famous master mechanic Kulibin succeeded in winding up the clock. In his late period, Murillo painted his most famous images of the Virgin. He took her features from the actual women of Andalusia and thus glorified their beauty. The subtlety of his pictorial means gave the name to that period of his work, aerial, vaporoso. The art of El Greco reflects the stormy spiritual atmosphere of the time. The actual hero of this painting is the Apostle Paul, with his resolute and purposeful appearance. While the Christian Church always accentuated the spiritual superiority of the Apostle Peter, it has been supposed by investigators of El Greco's work that the face of the Apostle Paul is a self-portrait. The elongated proportions and the somber color scheme with nervous splashes of contrasting tones are used to strengthen the passionate emotionality of the painting.
The stormy spiritual atmosphere of that time was reflected in the work of El Greco, too. His painting the apostles St. Peter and St. Paul, foreshadows or even begins his famous series Apostolados, with a representation of Christ and the 12 apostles. The motif of the distinctive conflict between the two apostles, depicted by the painter, was based on the text of the New Testament, to wit, of the letters to the Galatians, where the conflict was described between Paul and Peter, which took place in Antioch. The major personage is here Paul, with his resolute and purposeful appearance, while the Christian church always accentuated the spiritual superiority of the apostle Peter. The elongated proportions, the somber color scheme with nervous splashes of contrasting tones, reflected the passionate emotionality characteristic of the pictorial system of El Greco. In the features of Paul, one can discern a self-portrait of the painter himself. The Greek artist Domenichos Theotokopoulos, who was born in Crete and called El Greco in Spain, became thus the most Spanish of its painters.
Once Goya said he had 3 teachers: life, Velázquez, and Rembrandt. All these lessons are present in the portrait of the actress Antonia Serrate, whose image is noble, psychologically deep, and full of life. Goya's particular thrilling of emotions and passionate flickering of light, handled by his brush and color manner, are to be considered as a foretoken of the near Romanticism.